You see, looking at the phenomenon of people relapsing after a long period of recovery, multiple years, 10 plus even, to the outsider, it is so baffling and so painful. And one thinks, what would have to happen to get a person to return to a behavior which they had proven to themselves was death-defying and painful and destructive, and had had this long period of respite from it? It would have to be something very, very powerful to draw a person back. We're in the realm of belief now. I'm going to tell you what my belief about this is. A person behaves according to their level of consciousness. When I had the consciousness of addiction, the consciousness of an addict, addiction was possible for me in a big way in my life. I would say to you that I lied, but I'm not a liar. I cheated, but I'm not a cheat. I stole, but I'm not a thief. I was in the consciousness of somebody where those behaviors could take place. The path of recovery is nothing more than a map that leads to greater and greater consciousness, awareness. As we move down that path, surely, as human beings, we are going to experience difficulty, pain, and also love, joy, success. We're going to see everything on both sides of the coin. We know that. It's a guarantee. But the work of being on a spiritual path, a path of recovery, is to constantly work on building and expanding consciousness, awareness. We can see more than we used to see. We can detect more than we used to detect. The way that we go about raising our consciousness is through self-inquiry, is through spiritual practice of some form or another, which is usually physical and emotional and mental practice as well, and also in surrender. An understanding of the basic concept, I believe, required for any path forward, is to understand that we are not the one in charge, that we are not the one doing everything. Indeed, we have to take the actions, but the results of our actions are not ours to claim. So we go through these spiritual practices, like, for example, yoga, study of spiritual texts, meditation, and there's this heat, literally and figuratively, a spiritual heat that's formed within each one of us. On the path of the 12 steps, we go through that heat through the work of the 12 steps, the writing out of our personal inventory, the reading of our personal inventory to another human being, the prayer and the meditation, and the amends process to other people. That creates a certain amount of spiritual heat. And all paths that lead to truth have some process that creates that heat. That heat is kind of like the catalyst for change. While we're doing those practices which create heat, and if you'll go with me here on this intellectual journey, the heat is burning its way. It's sort of burning, it's clearing the path for us. There's a heat that clears the way for us so that we can move forward. As we're moving forward, there's a certain amount of self-study we're on a personal inquiry in our life. I believe also that all spiritual paths, and certainly all paths of recovery, are going to require that we look within. We're going to have to observe our life. We're going to have to observe our relationships. We're going to have to note our strengths and our weaknesses. And we're going to learn through the process of living with awareness more about ourselves so that we can evolve, learn, grow, connect, and be better at being ourselves naturally, and also walking through this path called life, called human life. All of that is kind of impossible in a way without that foundational piece of bowing, surrender. I recognize that, let's say I have a cut on my hand. I cut my hand and it's bleeding, and I have to take an action to create the circumstances for healing to take place. So I'm going to wash the wound. I'm going to put on some Neosporin, some antiseptic, and then I'm going to put on a Band-Aid to cover it and protect it. And lo and behold, these few actions that I take result in the healing of that cut. I know that I did the actions, but there's no way that I can claim responsibility for doing the healing. It's done for me. I don't think about it. I'm not thinking about weaving together tissues, sinew and muscle so that this heals. I'm not able to do that. I don't have that intelligence, not at the level of thought, not at the level of even intuition. It's happening. That's what I mean when we talk about surrender. We have to take these beautiful actions to move ourselves forward towards greater and greater awareness and consciousness. But ultimately, the fruits of our actions don't belong to us. So, this is how we expand consciousness. If we stop that process, if we become complacent, if we begin to behave in ways that are out of alignment with our center, without repairing the damage of behaving in those ways, without recognizing or honoring the fact that we're living out of alignment with ourself, I believe that's the road toward relapse. And I believe it can happen to anybody at any particular length of recovery. It doesn't really matter. This morning, I woke up, did a little practice, been doing some wonderful things today, nourishing myself. I played some tennis. I did some things. I stayed sober. You might say I'm as sober as anybody else on the planet who didn't use drugs today consciously and who didn't drink alcohol consciously. That's a choice, and we are sober in this thing called sobriety together. That's the extent of my recovery any given day. If I begin to blow that off, if I begin to lie and cheat or steal, what that shows me is I have dropped in my consciousness to a place where lying, cheating, and stealing is now possible yet again. And guess what's close behind? See, when we start to heal, especially when we've healed for long periods of time, we are more aware, and we're also more sensitive. That increased sensitivity shows us, or I should say, we're unable to avoid the fact that we're not living according to our heart's desire. We're too sensitive for that. We're too aware not to notice. So if we get off track, it's painful. It's like, oh, problem, Tommy, you have left the building. You need to bring things back in. You need to reel it in. If there's been some dishonesty, it needs to be cleaned up. Most of all, scheming and secrets are not luxuries that I feel I can afford. And so the knee-jerk reaction, which is very healthy and wonderful, that I have to feeling either off-center, or if I have challenging thinking or powerful, challenging emotions, or if the circumstances of life present something that's difficult. For me, the knee-jerk reaction is to pick up the phone, call somebody, talk to a teacher, a therapist, a member of a recovery program or a path of spirituality, someone that I can connect with, who I can have a real conversation with and say, okay, here's what I'm experiencing. I want some guidance, some support. Help me to get through this and to see beyond where I'm at. The other choice there is to not let anybody know at all, and to stay in a place of pain and suffering and challenge, to not let anybody know what's going on with you. And I think that's where the split happens. There's this sort of presence and awareness, I'm okay and I'm on the path. Even if you make mistakes, you could always own them and move beyond them. But when you start making mistakes, or you start having painful thoughts or difficult thoughts, or using thoughts or negative thoughts or self-doubting thoughts, whatever it is, on the path of spirit, that's showing us something. And we have an opportunity to share, to learn, and to grow through the pain of going through those difficult thoughts or emotions. One final thought here. We must develop the capacity Two final thoughts here. Number one, I believe we have to develop the capacity to sit still, to become more intimate with ourselves. And I think that practice, known as meditation, is a critical component of recovery that is often overlooked. I don't believe it's something that can be, I'll take it or leave it. It's very important. And I think that the practice of meditation, especially as a person gets some years into recovery, is going to become more and more important. Because we can create a separation from our true, what I would refer to as our true self, our consciousness, our awareness, the watching mind, the watching part of us. We can create a separation between the witness and our thoughts and our emotions. We can create space so that when things happen to us, we can pause and respond to life with grace and dignity rather than reacting to life, which often brings pain and suffering. The second thing is, there is a deeper detoxification available to us than the primary detoxification of coming off of drugs or alcohol or whatever the addictive behavior might have been. The primary detox, of course, is critical. We have to get the physical body detoxed from the, for example, if you're on opiates, from the physical craving and addiction, or alcohol, the physical craving and addiction from that kind of regular imbibing. But there's a deeper detox, which I believe absolutely has to take place. And it takes place through that spiritual practice that I spoke about earlier, based in the physical and emotional bodies. Now I'm speaking in spiritual terms because we're not just dealing with the physical body now, we're talking about deeper aspects of our being, the emotional aspects of our being. And as my dear friend and wonderful colleague Nikki Myers says, the issues are in your tissues. Literally, the emotional residue of trauma and your core issues resides still in most of us in the tissues of our body, and we need a mind-body modality to move those issues out. This is the deeper detoxification that I'm speaking of, that I believe opens a new door. And the new door, once that work is done, the new door allows you to live one day at a time beyond addiction, free from the frequency of addiction, free from the plague of the thinking and mental aspect of addiction, certainly free from physical craving, and more in alignment with your own being, your heartfelt desire, and your creativity to live the life that you desire to live. And yet, until that work is done, I found in my own recovery, and I see in so many other people's experiences, a vulnerability to relapse will remain, a stuckness will remain, secondary addictions and those kinds of behaviors will remain until we can bring ourselves to greater consciousness and that deeper level of detoxification. For me, it happened through the path of yoga. I mean, very physical practices which had emotional implications, of course, physical implications, spiritual implications. Very, very powerful practices of yoga, both from the Hatha tradition and the Kundalini yoga tradition as taught by Yogi Bhajan. Also the Tantric tradition, which takes us all the way back to the original roots of yoga. That practice seems to me to be designed to help people on a path of recovery, and all human beings, to get to that deeper level of detox. So each day you can truly be clean as you move through life and start anew each morning.